What's up, bugs and Lestriad faithful? It's your boy Swolelax here, back at it again. We are, incoming days of Dallas is upon us, and I feel like we have a lot of people in the exact same boat. So just to kind of briefly explain here, I was talking to our beautiful guest here, Alex SuperInsaiyan, if you want to introduce yourself.
Name's Alex. SuperInsaiyan18 is my regular channel, Yu-Gi-Oh! I do have an Elestrals channel. It is Insane Elestrals. Haven't really been posting too much there, but life's hectic. I plan on bringing some stuff there, so if you want to go check that out as well. But yeah, that's me.
Yeah, and also just kind of a brief other introduction to Alex. No slouch at card games either. I think YCS Sacramento, you topped that one, and I did pretty well at a few other Elestral events, from my understanding.
So I topped YCS Sacramento. That's my first, YCS top. I have several Yu-Gi-Oh! Regional tops. Don't know if this necessarily counts, but it was the biggest in-person Elestrals event that we did in Texas when we got together at the Yu-Gi-Oh! Event. I was undefeated along with Bean Soldier. We were the only two undefeateds at the end of the tournament. And I have topped, I think it's either 2 out of 3 or 3 out of 4 of the webcam premiere events that I've played for Elestrals.
Yeah. So just if you're wondering who this person is I'm talking to, literally no slouch at this game, and also really good at other games, just for fair reference. And the reason why I'm prefacing this is because even as top players and experienced players in Elestrals, Yu-Gi-Oh! Otherwise, it can be hard to pick a deck. Currently right now, I know a lot of people are going through a deck crisis for it to bring to the largest first in-person event for Elestrals. Lots on the line for people. And SuperInsaiyan, Alex, I know that you are in this boat exclusively. You said you're floating between 3-4 decks. You don't have to spoil anything for the people at home. But yeah.
Yeah, so I'm freaking out about what to play. So to kind of preference it, I have either 6 or 7 decks built right now that I've been testing over the course of the last 2 weeks. And I think I've got it narrowed down to about 3 or 4 of them. For the sake of the video, I'm going to say 3 of them because I know one of them is a deck that my quote teammates don't necessarily want out in the wild yet, so I don't know if I'm allowed to talk about it. But yeah, I'm kind of just hovering on 3 or 4 of those 6 or 7 that I have built, and there's so many reasons to just flip back and forth between them, and it is a rough choice.
Yeah, and honestly, that's kind of the weird part about Moonrise in the meta right now. If you guys do not know, Moonrise, when we first started this, Lunar Aggro, Justin, and Trish built together this kind of insane, all-encompassing, good all-rounder deck. And then suddenly, next couple tournaments, we're seeing a bunch of other decks pop up, which for a few reasons that could be the case. So you might be wondering yourself, well then, if Lunar Aggro is not doing it anymore, what's popping up? So Alex and I are going to be sitting here talking about the pros and cons, strengths and weaknesses to potentially 6 decks that I think kind of narrow down as decks that we will either see in Dallas, maybe you should take to Dallas, or if you're not playing in Dallas, just have fun. Maybe go to your locals and beat up on some children. So to hop into the decks, we have, of course, the big bad wolf of the format, Lunar Aggro. And this is kind of encompassing other variants of Lunar Aggro as well. The idea is that this deck is a 5s quote-unquote tempo type strategy that is utilizing things like Werepup, Like a Void, Full Moon, maybe even Nabi to establish a lot of advantage and just play really classic Elestrals. So in your testing, what do you think are some of the pros for this list? We'll get into the pros first, and then we'll get into the cons after.
So Lunar Aggro is kind of in a weird space, right? Because like you said, we saw it take off at the start of the format, and then the last couple tournaments, it hasn't really been doing so well. You mentioned that we saw a lot of other decks pop up, but it's also worth noting that even though Lunar Aggro was still in these tournaments, it wasn't making the cut. And I think it's just because people were prepping for it too much. But I think one of the biggest pros of it is it just plays all of the best cards. So you can't prep for the best cards because everybody's really playing them, and they're the best cards for a reason. You have stuff like Nabi that's going to run over everything. You have Spectrus, which is going to just completely ruin Galaxy's game plan. And I think that's the biggest pro, is that it just has those powerhouse cards there. The problem with the fact, because we had 3 webcam premieres since Moonrise dropped. 2 of them were won by Justin on Lunar Aggro. And I think Trish also, he took second at one, he top 4'd the other, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, that's right.
So because of that, it's on everybody's radar. And so there's super easy ways that you can prep for it now. Obviously, Nabi doesn't do anything into Lunar, so you can, or Solar for that matter. So we've seen Winjin pop up because that's a Solar-based deck. Nabi isn't going to help you out there, so that's one way to turn off one of their biggest aggressive pushes. Another thing that we've seen is players siding, I think it's Waxing Crescent, whichever one the Lunar phase is that changes the position of a Lunar Elestral. That's now an incredible side deck choice, because if you're going into Lunar aggro, you can just prevent them from attacking you.
Thing about it is that it's true, if this deck does lose tempo, it can also be pretty challenging to get back into the game. And I think a lot of decks and a lot of players are preparing to handle Lunar aggro and to kind of like halt their tempo, so to speak. Cryoblast, as well as like a really strong card into a lot of the cards inside of Lunar aggro. Even at times, Hurricane can be a blowout into that deck. And I think that's kind of the thing, though, is that some of the weaknesses, it might be outside of the deck's control, but overall, you're right. It's got a massive target, and a lot of people are very experienced at the matchup. One thing that you might not be able to prepare for at all is our next deck we're going to talk about, which is the big boogeyman of the format. Right before the Moonrise meta came out, everyone was testing with this deck, and it is something that is, well, if you're a fan of casinos, this one's for you. Blizz Tricks, kind of one that I'm also personally eyeing as well. I know some people are looking at. This is a deck that wants to establish milling the deck out to special cast cards like Blizztrix, Aspral, Cedarsaur, and of course Morlith has been seeing a rise in popularity recently too. A lot of really strong big Elestrals. However, there are some pretty decent downsides that maybe want to steer clear from this deck. Specifically for tournaments too, we'll get into that. So pros for this one, I think personally it's just the thing that can build wide boards, and they're really hard to out sometimes. Like you have a Cedarsaur that's on your field, plus you have like a Morlith backed up by a counter rune. That can be game in itself, and this deck can do that pretty fast. But it can also not do that. And do you want to speak to that? I think that's kind of been the experience, that some people are like, oh, this deck's crazy. And I know that you've been someone who's like, I don't know about this deck.
So, okay, I've got a lot of thoughts about Blizztrix, so I might just start rambling here.
Go for it. Absolutely. Perfect.
Right now, and this is going to sound really weird, funny, awkward, however you want to classify this, the biggest pro that I think Blizztrix has is that it is a phenomenal excuse to not play heal.
Yeah, true.
Blizztrix has a very good matchup into heal. Heal has a very hard time dealing with it. And it's one of the very few decks that can out damage the capacity that they can heal. And as we've seen with both Caleb and I think Julian topped the last webcam with it as well, heal is picking up in relevance again. Albeit it is a different variant. It's not like that weird critical massive removal heal that we saw back in early Daybreak. It is more of a control variant rather than a stall variant, which makes it a little bit more forgivable if you ask me. But I just despise heal, so that's my biggest pro for Blizz. The cons, like you said, is you gotta like go into the casino. The thing that I really don't like about Blizztrix, because like some people will compare it to Tearlaments in Yu-Gi-Oh! The difference is that not every single mill is good. It's not like that deck where you can just mill your entire deck and it doesn't matter what you milled because everything does something. The problem that I specifically have with Blizz is the mills have to happen in a sequential order. If they do not occur in that order, then they do not work, and you have to rely on something like Rise from the Ashes, which then gets really expensive.
And then also, like, in a lot of the testing that I've done with it, and I think also some of the other Lestronauts, it's like, sometimes if you do not also have like a counter rune, like 1 or 2 to back up your board, it can be pretty broken. And Josh recently released a Blizztrix deck profile that kind of described that some of your boards can be very strong, but not unbeatable unless you have like a shield, a tsunami, Gorgons, whatever back there. The cons for me on this one are pretty huge, especially if you're going into a long tournament like something like Dallas. Do you really trust that you're going to hit big every single round? Odds might not be in your favor.
The biggest thing that I'm scared of, and what you mentioned a little bit earlier, is the Eruption. Eruption is a card that mostly heal, but I think some other people are starting to throw in their side decks. Because of how expensive Blizztrix is, there's a lot of times where you're winning the game and you've only got 2 to 3 spirits left. And all it takes is for heal to play the waiting game until you put yourself down to 2 spirits, and then they eruption you, and like you just lost a game that you should have otherwise won. And that just overall spirit expenditure that this deck has to go through is horrifying to think about, especially like you said, in a big long event. Like if you're going to like a 4-round local, sure, but we're looking at what it's going to be 8 rounds of Swiss day 1, and then they're doing, I think he said top 32 in the announcement video, so that's then another 5 rounds. We're playing 13 rounds of Elestrals, and you have to get lucky 13 times to win the event.
To kind of piggyback off that, talking about a deck that's the next one on our list is heal stall, heal control, heal aggro, whatever you want to call it. Effectively deck establishing things like Sluggle, Quackle, using good stuff like Eddy and Galaxy, things like Argo, and also Eruption, potentially, that we could be seeing from this deck. So I know for you, I haven't had much testing with this one. I had a lot of testing with like older heal stall variants, but for you, you've been saying this one might be pretty good. What are your thoughts on heal, control, stall, whatever for Dallas?
So, like I said with Blizz, the best pro for Blizz is that it's my biggest excuse to not play heal. In my personal testing, heal has by far been performing the best. It's been the most consistent. It has a really good balance, because like if you refer to the older builds that I mentioned about how it was like that critical mass of just removal, it was a different kind of heal. You weren't doing anything, you were never getting aggressive. It was wipe opponent's board, heal some spirits, pass. And eventually you got to a game state where they would have 1 spirit left and they have to try to make a push. They summon a guy, and then like Shield of Achilles is the OTK button. My problem with it is just the most miserable experience to play, in my opinion. Which is honestly probably the only con that I have to say about it, is that it is, and take this with a grain of salt, everybody's views on what is fun and what isn't is totally subjective. For me, it is the worst gameplay experience that I have ever personally had, and I am looking for any excuse to not play it.
Yeah, it's funny because like I know Josh and Caleb both here love doing like the heal mirror. They love playing this really, like, at least, and also before, really slow, methodical play. It's like sudden death Elestral is what I call it, because every single decision matters. And we were talking about this with Blizz, where it's like over 13 rounds. There probably are players that can really, really do that. However, some of the cons really do start to add up, being that it can be kind of hard to out larger Elestrals unless you're teching in some stuff. Alternatively, too, things like Blizzstrix or even some other decks can potentially even outpace you. And on top of that, it's like, yeah, it's it's not as slow as it used to be, but it can be pretty miserable. It can be pretty miserable. Moving on to something that I think is within the realm of heal, control, stall, etc., is actually a deck that kind of incorporates a lot of those elements. Now, this is kind of my wild card pick for Dallas specifically. And maybe this is wrong. Fire Nexus can maybe take this slot too. Spoilers, it's not Fire Nexus. But it's Water Reanimator. I think we've seen a lot of really interesting variants of this deck pop up randomly. On the last Premier tournament, we had like a Joblin Draking list that was like Water Reanimator adjacent. In previous tournaments, we've had just like a really aggro drops of Leaf with like the Oistilleries and Caprigold stuff pop in. Personally, I think this deck is not a bad choice, especially for someone that's like a beginner. If you are new to Elestrals, Water Reanimator, it has a lot of really strong tools. It's also really easy to get because a lot of the cards come in like the starter deck. So even if you're at the venue, you might be able to put this together for like pennies. And then on top of that too, it has a pretty decent matchup into decks like Blizzstrix or even like Lunar Aggro, just because of the nature of the cards. Cons though, it can be expensive. It has the same kind of problem as heal control, where sometimes you're waiting for stuff to happen. You're gathering your combo pieces before you even heal back. Sometimes the Elestrals are really small, and that can be a problem. And on top of that, depending on which variant you play, this deck might just be free for any other strategy. It really depends. What do you think of something like Water Reanimator?
Water Reanimator is one of the ones I don't have a ton of experience with. It's not one of the ones that I've personally built for my testing. I think that you were kind of on the money when you said it's kind of like a heal adjacent, because a lot of the times the stuff that you are reanimating is going to be a Sluggle, it's going to be a Dratagua, and the whole kind of point is to just outpace your opponent by the fact that you have more activations than they do. Because let's not forget that, you know, life is your activations. The more life you have, the more activations you have. So you're really just trying to outpace your opponent there. And again, for me, that's just kind of a miserable game plan. So I can't just say that I'm a fan of it. I do think that you are also correct in the aspect of there are some matchups where it's just free.
And that's the thing, that's why I'm putting it as my wild card slot, is that deck that I think people will try to play just based off of vibes, but maybe one of the lower tier that we're going to be talking about today too. Also a deck that I think will see representation, but maybe not as much as maybe we've been seeing. Big depends. Is Trogan, or the Winjin deck. It's the Genie archetype. I know that you've played a little bit of this. What are your thoughts on the Genie?
The version that I have played is not the version that we have seen top. Again, I'm not super familiar with it, but I don't understand how the version that has topped does it. Because Winjin, unless you've Apollo'd, because I'm pretty sure those are the only, or the Apollo is the only way that the deck has to look at the top of its deck, you're just calling it a shot in the dark, right? Now, obviously, you should know what cards are in your deck. You should be able to reasonably kind of figure out what is still in there based on what's been played, and you can up your chances of calling correctly that way. Like, you know, for example, if you've already gone through 2 of your Gorgon's Gaze, you're probably not going to see a Gorgon's Gaze on the top, so it's probably not worth calling. But, I mean, it's done well. I think that there's also that kind of heal adjacent because of the Cathmel stuff. I don't know if this is a con or not. To me, this just kind of looks icky when it comes to deck building. But playing 4 Divines feels insane.
Yeah, it feels kind of weird, right?
Obviously, you know, you have Elichic to search them, so like putting them at 4 just feels so awkward. But again, the fact that like the whole play of this deck is to call the top cards of your deck, the Apollo becomes so significantly important. But then you also need the Zeus to be able to out-meta threats. And, like, it makes sense that you would play both, but just seeing 4 Divines in a deck is bad vibes.
Yeah, it's kind of funky because, like, the Divines are some of the most powerful cards inside of the entire game. So, in theory, a deck that can play multiple is pretty solid. But I think Zeus is one that obviously everyone knows is, like, the strongest right now. And then Apollo is really good in a strategy like this where you're foretelling and having to quote unquote predict things, but it's still not Demeter. It's still not Zeus. Like Apollo is not, it's not, I would say not a do nothing card, especially in the strategy, but like it sometimes can just be a dead card. Zeus as well, spirit management wise, like you said, is kind of ridiculous. Like the pros and cons for this one are really weird because the pros are more like, yeah, it's good. Like Trogan's a really big body. The advantage engine you would get off of that combo if you get it is nice, but the big thing is if you get it. And unlike Blizz Strix, which can kind of back itself up with Moroliths and like really big bodies, Trogan can get hit by Cryoblast. Eddies can out this card.
That's the big thing.
Yeah, Eddy is everywhere, and so a deck that effectively can die to just one Eddy, pretty big con in my opinion. But the strategy I think will be represented. That's kind of the crazy part about it, is that I think players are really liking this deck. So I think Trogan is about what I would expect to see as like the premier wind deck. However, I do think there is one more that I do want to talk about because it did recently take down a tournament. Before we do that, some honorable mentions inside of this category that you could probably see taken to Dallas / play Dallas is stuff like Fire Nexus we mentioned previously. Bug Box is a deck that's really cool, very fun to play. Plays all the good stuff like Ardvud and Nobbies and Spectaris and Viscerus.
Yeah, no, it is definitely my sleeper pick. I think that all it takes is the right build. We just don't have it yet.
I completely agree. So speaking of the sleeper hit, last tournament, the last premiere before Dallas coming up here, we have the winner, Store and Plays, brought, I don't really know what to call this one. Phallocane Turbo. It was Wind Nexus or Wind Destruction stuff. I'm calling it Wind.deck because effectively this deck is non-Aeolus playing Phallocane, P-Gust. It's on Sorlitz, El Clasico, and then it's got like good stuff pile with wind instead of what we normally assume is thunder or like earth, etc. I don't know how much you know about this deck. I went in on the tank on this deck because I was just so confused.
This deck brings back my PTSD from Season 3 Elestriad. Because Kevin, Distant Coder, completely washed me with a deck that just played 18 removals. Yeah. And that is exactly what this deck is. I've got the deck list pulled up, and if you look at it, pretty much every single card in the deck is dedicated to just removing another card, with the exception of like specifically Ash Rabbit and Ambrosia. You've got Boombat as Destruction, Eddie is again just Sorlet, it's going to swap the position and out something. Like every single card in this list says, I am destroying something on your field. Have fun.
It is really kind of a crazy list. I remember talking to Soren a little bit after the tournament, commentating it, but the theory I think is really sound for this one. But I think that like pros for this deck, I think you have a lot of really strong Elestrals that can do a lot of things. It effectively can out most, if not every deck. And you're right, this thing is like 14 to 15 removals, and it's just like, okay, we're gonna value trade here. But I do think the cons for this one are kind of interesting. So one, is Falocane real? I don't know. The Ascensions in this game right now are pretty solid because the tempo is just slow enough to where you can maybe ascend on a turn if you can protect something. Falocane is one of the best ones to do it for because it's just Hurricane if you think about it. And this deck can play a lot of really good support to enable that game plan. But it also is a little bit of a dead draw if you're behind in tempo. As well, Sorlet is very cryoblastable. And on top of that too, things like Galax Air, while yes, it will swap, it also is probably gonna get threatened on the crackback.
Going back to kind of what you said about Ascensions, I think Falocane is probably the weakest part of this deck just because it takes setup. Nothing else in the deck requires you to do anything other than play the card. Falocane requires you to be able to actually get to it, and I think that's a little bit problematic. I think that some sort of like list similar to this has a lot of potential, where you could just play, again, a bunch of removals and just go with, I have better card economy than my opponent, therefore I'm going to win. And I think that that's kind of very similar to how heal functions. You just play the better card economy, so you're going to win. But I think that if we do see something like this at Dallas, it's going to be minus the Falocane and adding in some other kind of just good stuff card.
For this for Dallas upcoming tournaments, future premieres, a lot of players will be looking at these lists that have topped and have won previously and seeing, okay, is this optimized? Can we optimize it? And I think you hit the nail on the head. I would say hit the nail on the money. I think you hit the Blizz jackpot with this one, and whatever metaphorical and stuff here. In that this list, while it did win, does feel unoptimized, and so an optimized win list maybe could be scary. And this definitely has the bones of something like that. That's kind of all the decks that I think I've had my eye on, and I know that a lot of players inside of these like secret circles, if you want the Elestronati, Cabal shenanigans, whatever. But people have been talking about shouts to the Cabal, yeah. The Lunar Aggro, Blizztrix, Heal, Control, Water Reanimator, Tornadin, we talk about Bug Box, and this Wind deck are some things that I think people are eyeing. And so, after these pros and cons list, Alex, are you any closer to deciding what you want to play for Dallas?
Not particularly, but that's just because I'm indecisive. I'm sitting here like I have my Blizz deck on my desk. I've been hand shuffling and just kind of fidgeting with it while we're talking, and I still I hate Blizz for the luck factor. I love it for the fact that it's not heal. Like I said, the three that I had were Blizz, Heal, and Lunar Aggro. Lunar Aggro, as we said, has that target on it. All signs are pointing to me to play Blizz, but my luck is so horrendous. I don't know. I gotta run 100 games before I leave in 3 days and see what ends up working. Maybe I can get all my bad luck out now, or maybe I can optimize it to where the luck doesn't matter, or maybe I'm just going to be miserable and you'll see me win the event with Heal. Who knows?
True. For everyone that's at home watching this, wondering what to play, maybe consider these lists, or maybe consider just, I don't know, playing fives again. Really just whatever you feel like. The gamble is real. Shout out to JJ. Literally shout out to JJ. Brings has not read a card since like Frostfall. I guarantee it. No, that is pretty good. So, Alex, thanks so much for being here with me and hopping on to Yap for just a little bit of time about these lists. Again, I know that this is a pervasive, ongoing thought process for you. So I know a lot of people are in a similar boat. So it's good to hear your thoughts on this and kind of your insight, which I think was beautiful. So if anyone at home is watching, where can they find you?
So like I said, I have my main channel, which is Yu-Gi-Oh based. If you don't want Yu-Gi-Oh content, I'm not going to blame you. But that is SuperInsaiyan 18. I do have an Elestrals channel. It is Insaiyan Elestrals. And I don't have much up there yet, but I do plan on bringing more in the upcoming weeks after Dallas. Life has just been a little too hectic to upload regularly, but those are the two main places if you want to listen to me yap.
Yeah, absolutely. And links will be down below as well. Make sure to like this video if you guys want to like it, I guess. Subscribe for more stuff, etc., etc. Let us know in the comments what you're bringing to Dallas, so we know way in advance if we face you. And just report yourself real quick. Please tell us what to play. Oh God.
Yeah, self-report. Give us the upper hand. We need it.
Yeah, honestly, we're all scattered here. Anyways, all right. Thanks so much for watching, everyone. We'll see you later. Bye-bye.